Thank you, Karma. As Karma mentioned, I am Jennifer Hooker, and I am the Finance Director for Ujima. I would like to thank you for joining me today, and I would like to thank you for the services you provide to your community. Today, we will discuss some key elements that are essential to effective grant management, elements that will help your organization run strong and healthy. So if your organization is a future, a newbie, or an established federal grant recipient, this information is for you. Please feel free to ask questions, make comments, and share experiences or expertise. Today's topic is Getting It Right, Grant Management for Cultural Pacific Organizations. Why this topic? Next. Because your organizations address critical community needs. Yeah. One more. Okay. You enrich the lives in your community, providing a sense of safety and belonging, uplifting the voice and community of those unheard. You seek out to make the world better, symbolizing the best of America. And because managing a grant successfully is just as important as securing the funds, it is crucial that your grant management structure is solid. To get started, I have a question. Can you build a house without a solid foundation? The platform that prevents the house from shifting? Can you build a house with an unleveled cornerstone? The stone that determines the position of all stones? How about a house with an unstable frame? The structure that supports and shapes your house. Can you build this kind of house? The answer to all three questions is yes, you can. You can erect the walls, place the roof, and move in, and even live comfortable for a short period of time. But at some point, the foundation will weaken, the structure will lame and fall, or the house will become inhabitable. And the same is true with grant management. We can start off with good intentions, an important mission, excellent programs, and committed staff, flying by our pants and skirts, figuring things out along the way. However, just like the house, after a while, the cracks are going to show. The structure of your organization will be affected, and most certainly your mindset and stress levels. This is why it is so important that we labor to get it right. Grant management can be a massive undertaking, adhering to rules, regulations, and grant requirements that governs our federal grants. However, it does not have to be if we build a solid grant management structure. So the application process is completed. The notice of award has been accepted. So now the work begins. This is where the rubber hits the road. Because with federal funding comes great responsibilities, which equals grant management. Now is the time to get it right. Now is the time for grant management. And to help in this process, today I will be covering some key elements to effective grant management: compliance, rules and regulations, financial management system, documentation, audit requirements, board of directors, and internal capacity. Are there any questions? I'm trying to get a different view so I can see everyone. I'm sorry. So let's get started. There is a fundamental truth about construction. Any building that is constructed has a better chance of lasting on bedrock than on sand. That is a guarantee. In other words, a foundation is built on. And if the foundation is solid, the end product will be solid. In other, well, the foundation for grant management is compliance, the act or process of abiding by. Not saying I may abide by, or I am thinking about abiding by, or I don't know the information, so it's okay if I do not abide by. This is a sand foundation. No, compliance is actually the act or process of abiding by, adhering to, complying with the rules and the regulations that govern federal awards. This is your solid foundation. Compliance is the platform that prevents your house from shifting. It reflects character, trust, integrity, loyalty. It's the foundation stone for a balanced success. Compliance indicates your organizations are capable of securing and maintaining a complex grant. When done well, compliance increases efficiency and effectiveness because employees know how to do their job and reason through ambiguous situations. Compliance builds respect and honest communication to the community you belong to while building trust. It creates an ongoing relationship with the funding awarding agency, assuring them that you are regulating the conduct of your employees and that you are complying with applicable rules and regulations. Compliance ensures that valuable dollars are spent well and contributions are above scrutiny. It opens doors for current and future funding. Compliance purpose is to protect the organization. It's that simple. So, any ideas on how we build this system? Open book. Exactly right. Simply by abiding by the rules and regulations that governs our grants. This includes learning the rules and regulations, designing and documenting policies and procedures to adhere to the rules and regulations. When done well, your organization will be protected. Your foundation will be solid, and you will be getting it right. Are there any questions about compliance? No? Compliance is very important because the rules and regulations that governs our grants are the cornerstones to effective grant management. The cornerstone we should build our organization policies and procedures around. The cornerstone our policies and procedures should adhere to, should be set in reference to, and is the first stone laid on our foundation, as in this tapestry. Therefore, following the rules and regulations, the instruction manual that comes with our grant award is essential. But why is following directions so hard? Well, a few weeks ago, I decided it was time for me to organize my home office space. So I decided to order myself a bookshelf. Well, I placed the order, I received the bookshelf, and when it came in, I opened the box, took out all the pieces, and with all my wisdom and knowledge, I tossed the directions to the side. Besides, I had places to go, people to see, and things to do. You know the saying. So I proceeded to put my unit together. When I finished, I stepped back and oh yeah, I was proud. I took a look and I said, the bookshelf is sturdy and it is solid. However, the closer I got, the more I began to realize that one shelf was flipped upside down. See, one side of the shelving had a protective coating and one side did not. Something I did not know. And of course, the thoughts and the frustrations took over. If only I knew this before I started. If only I would have followed the directions. Well, the same is true when it comes to grant management. We mistakenly leave out, toss to the side, or fail to understand the rules and regulations that governs our grants. Why? Because we have so much to do, so many places to go, too many people to see, or a lack of internal capacity or expertise. Then we revert to the same thoughts, if only. Whatever your reasons may be, just like the bookshelf, our federal awards come with an instruction manual called Rules and Regulations. And the major two manuals we're going to discuss today are 2 CFR 200 and Grant Award Special Conditions. Unlike the directions that come with my bookshelf, these two manuals cannot be tossed to the side. They govern our grant. They are not suggestions, but requirements, and they must be followed. Compliance is mandatory, a condition of our grant award. So did I correct my shelf? Yes, I did. I concluded the protective coating is a defense shield against wear and tear. It is there to ensure the structure will last a long time. And that is exactly the purpose of grant rules and regulations, to keep us in compliance, to ensure longevity of our organization. Remember, compliance protects our organizations. Rules and regulations provide long life. So now we are going to discuss these two manuals. Is everybody good? Any questions? 2 CFR 200 is the section of the Code of Federal Regulations that house our first instruction manual, titled The Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements. It is created by the executive branches and federal agencies. This manual contains the general and permanent rules and regulations that governs all federal grant awards and agreements. And it is commonly called the Uniform Guidance. Thank you, great. We view it as the government-wide framework for grant management. These guidance are not new, but a consolidation of old rules into a single document. And very important to note, federal agencies and auditors use this uniform guidance when assessing compliance. This manual is located online, and the electronic version is updated daily. The uniform guidance is a huge document, roughly 300 pages and 6 subparts. Do not fear or let yourself become overwhelmed, because there's no way you can remember all the information. And we are definitely not going to go through the document. My goal today is to briefly go through the index of this manual so you will have a sense of the information included, because compliance to this manual is mandatory. And my second goal is to provide you with the website, so when creating your policies and procedures, you will know exactly where to go. Subpart A defines the acronyms and provide definitions for 98 words. If you will go back one slide for me, Sahida. Thank you. Subpart A defines acronyms and 98 words listed in your grant award, such as what the CFR and FCA stand for, or what is a cooperative agreement, or unliquidated versus obligated funds. Answers to these questions are located in this subpart. Subpart B contains the general grant provisions about your grant, such as why was this uniform guidance created, or what is OMB responsibilities. Subpart C contains the guidelines for our federal awarding agencies, providing them with guidance on items such as the requirement of public notice, the notice of funding opportunity, the use of grant agreements versus cooperative agreements. And the last three subparts are for us, federal grant recipients. These subparts contain the directions and the instructions, the guidance that governs our grant awards. It is from these subparts, these guidances, D through F, that our policies and procedures should be created around. Subpart D contains information regarding our post-federal award requirements, such as procurement standards, containing answers to questions such as what is full and open competition, or what are the procurement methods, or sub-recipient monitoring and management standards, defining what is the difference between a sub-recipient or a contractor, or it provides guidance on the requirements for pass-through entities. Part records and retention. How long should we retain our records? This guidance answers this question, which is 3 years, unless it's different in your grant special conditions. Subpart E, establish guidelines for determining costs. It defines 99 cost items. What are conference fees, depreciation, lobbying fees? Are these deductible? This section of the guidance will answer these questions. Subpart F, located in this section, are answers to questions such as, when is the audit required? What are my responsibilities? What are the auditor's responsibilities? How long is an audit? How is an audit determined? And what is audited? Subpart F will answer those questions. And the guidance also contains 12 appendix. If we have time, at the end of this presentation, we will look at the online version. I want you to see just how well organized it is and how easy it is to navigate through it. I must say, our federal agencies have done a great job in creating a document that provides guidance on basically every area of grant management. If we do not have time at the end of this presentation to look at this document, please remember that it is imperative that you take the time to read, understand, and to apply to this guidance. And it is important that you create your policies and procedures to adhere to this guidance. You may have to revise some. We had to go back, I had to go back, Carmen and I, and revise our procurement policy because it did not meet the requirements in 2 CFR. So make sure that your policies and procedures adhere to this guidance. Remember, it is to be used, not tossed. Are there any questions on 2 CFR 200? Our second manual is called Special Conditions. and it is located in our grant award documents. Grant special conditions are another cornerstone in grant management. Another stone our policies and procedures must adhere to and be created around. Imposed by our federal agencies. These guidelines are designed to ensure that we comply with the program statutory scope and programmatic requirements. All grants usually have general special conditions, such as progress and financial reporting dates, compliance to conditions such as compliance to 2 CFR, the award conditions, the civil rights compliances. It has special conditions such as employment verification requirements and lobbying and restrictions, limitations on the use of funds to the approved activities, also the consultant rate limitation, which is $6.50 a day or $81.25 an hour. However, it's the project-specific terms and conditions that usually provide the most restrictive limitations or prior approval conditions. For these reasons alone, it is very important to read your grant special conditions, because in some of our grants, they can include prior approval of all materials and publications such as flyers and brochures. Just think, the expense is approved in our grant budget. So let's publish, right? Nope. Put the brakes on it or take your pedal off the metal, because per our grant special conditions, our funding agency must approve the publications before printing it. If not, the printing costs cannot be charged to the grant. Also, prior approval to hold a conference. The same is true for a conference. It's approved in our budget. However, we have to submit a conference request form with the estimate conference costs and receive permission before we can hold a conference for this particular grant. Disallowance of trinkets for conferences, pens, mugs, t-shirts. Thought that would be supplies, right? Well, not if trinkets is disallowed in your special grant conditions. Then we had 2 grants with limitations on funds. We had a grant that states budget is pending review, so can only draw down an expense up to $10,000. And the $10,000 can only be used for training. Who would have thought such limitations? And especially the usage of money for training. How about the salary for the employee to go to the training? We had another grant that delayed our funding for 3 months, but the project had to start. How do you budget for that? All I can say is wisely, okay? However, how about a grant that says that all adjustments or modifications have to be approved? What happened to the 10% reallocation rule? Well, it doesn't apply for this grant in special conditions. And finally, we had a transitional housing grant, and it placed limitations on the services. Provide services for a minimum of 6 months and not more than 24 months. Or provide services for a minimum of 3 months and no more than 12 months after securing permanent housing. How confusing can that be? But we had to figure it out. Does anyone have others that you would like to discuss or mention at this point?
So some of the special conditions that we've also seen have been around, particularly for funding out of the Department of Justice, where you can't purchase food for events, and that has been really important for culturally specific organizations who, you know, generally when we come together for trainings and technical assistance events, we like to offer breakfast and lunch and things like that. And out of Department of Justice over the past couple of years, there's limitations around that. Some of the other things where you have the delay in funding for 3 months, that's really important as well, because before you can proceed with accessing those funds, you have to get clearance from the grant managers, et cetera. And so that's some of the additional fine print in the special conditions. So I think, you know, as you highlighted already, Jennifer, really reading through those special conditions is incredibly important. We've even had some organizations who said, based on the special conditions, they can't proceed with the grant because they can't manage given all of the special conditions. Like, you can't start your project without any funding for 3 months, right? Some organizations just can't manage that. So it's just, those things have been important, I think, discussion topics for all of our grantees.
Are there any others? So I hope you have an understanding of how important it is to read your grant special conditions. Okay, they may not make sense. They may be difficult to understand, or they may require a line of credit, but they must be followed. So it's very important to read them. Remember, compliance with your grant special conditions is a requirement of your grant. And as with the uniform guidance, they cannot be tossed. I know that was a lot of information, but my view in life and at this age is that I cannot remember everything, and I don't try. However, if I know that it's out there, I will search for it. Well, you have been served. You know exactly what and where your knowledge is located in 2 CFR and your grant special conditions. So Cultural Pacific organizations, let's get it right. Remember, all structures must have a strong foundation, but it is the cornerstone that anchors the foundation. Do I have any questions? Are there any questions at this point? So on to the framework. The framework for grant management are our policies and procedures. If built correctly, your organization will last long, run strong, and healthy. Your funder will be satisfied, and you will be less stressful. So the final portion of this presentation will focus on some key components of this framework. And since the framework is built around our rules and regulations, I will be referencing the guidance that we just went through throughout the balance of this presentation. So let's get started on the framework. Component 1 is financial management system. All organizations need a system to manage the flow of money in and out of the business. It is a necessity. And 2 CFR 200.302 set the requirements for our system. Per this guidance, all federal grant recipients are required to have a financial management system. It's fancy wording for an accounting system. This system must be an automated system, so it cannot be a paper system with paper and pen and pads. It has to be automated. It should be able to generate reports requested by our federal awarding agencies, such as budget to actual, statement of activities. It must be able to account for each grant separately, such as Grant A and Grant B, and it must accurately track funds according to the budget categories. consulting, supplies, payroll, and it must provide accrual basis accounting. In addition to the financial management system managing the flow of money in and out of your business, the system will provide a level of assurance that the agency funds are not commingled with other agency funds. This is the purpose of your financial management system. This system will provide assurance that each award is accounted for separately and that funds specifically budgeted and received for one project is not supporting another project. In other words, the system will provide assurance that funds are not commingled. That is very important because commingling of funds or the mixing of funds is prohibited. We cannot mix all of our eggs in one bowl. Why? Because commingling reduces or eliminates our ability to identify which portion of the commingled funds is related to authorized grant work or to a specific grant. Are there any questions about our financial management system of commingling? If not, we are going to look at an example and 2 exercises on this topic. Example 1. A recipient received 3 grant awards in 2020. Grant Award 1, $15,000, Grant Award 2, $25,000, and Grant Award 3, $10,000. Your system should make it possible to identify funds and expenditures separately for each program and each grant award. This organization has 2 programs, A and B. The report displays funds and expenses for each program. The organization received 3 grant awards, and the report displays funds and expenses for each award. The organization budget categories are payroll and supplies, and this report displays the expenses for each category. Our system should make it possible to identify these conditions. And the statement of activity is one report that your funding agency will be asking you for. Okay? So this is an exercise, so this requires participation. Okay? You have 3 active federal awards, and 2 employees charged a portion of their time to all 3 awards. How can you make sure that funds and expenditures are clearly identifiable with specific grants within the accounting system? Okay, anybody have any suggestions? Well, what is not sufficient is one expense account with payroll costs for all 2 employees. Next, Sahida, I'm sorry. Because you cannot commingle expenses. You must be able to separate the costs for each employee separately. Both employees must complete timesheets which should clearly show the time each spent on each award by grant name and code, as in this example. From this timesheet, employee A worked on 3 grants, and the timesheet displays hours charged to each. The employee's salary was charged to each grant based on her timesheet. Therefore, the timesheet will support expenses charged to each award. Also, the employee will have a separate payroll account. Therefore, the accounting system will display the expenses for each category. Salaries, employee A. Salaries, employee B. Okay? Remember, your report must meet these requirements. And timesheet is a very hot audit topic. And to get it right, make sure your timesheet meet the requirements of this section. If not, your expenses will probably be disallowed. I'm just reading some notes in the chat. Okay. Exercise 2. On June 30, 2020, Grant A had expenses of $7,000. Grant B, $5,000, and Grant C, $3,000, for a total of $15,000. Well, Grant A generated and received the payment of $15,000 and used the funds to pay expenses incurred under all three grants. Is this allowed? If not, why not? This is not allowed. You cannot commingle funds. Next, Sahita. In this exercise, funds from one agency is being moved into the account of another agency, mixing the eggs. There is no separation. This is prohibited, and the funds will have to be returned. Are there any questions? In closing, your financial management system must serve two purposes. It must be able to generate reports for your funding agency, and it must provide assurance that funds are not commingled. We have to get it right. Okay, component 2 is documentation. Can an organization succeed without great documentation? If you answer no, you are correct. An organization cannot succeed. It's that simple. Great documentation plays a vital role in assuring the success of an organization. It demonstrates that the organization is dedicated and committed to its role as a gatekeeper of effective grant management. We cannot say we will file the document tomorrow. We must file it today. Why? Because that is getting it right. Documentation serves as a minimum 3 purposes. It helps determine if a cost is allowable. It provides an audit trail, and it provides proof of an event, which is the most important purpose of documentation. Documentation tells a story, and when it is proper documentation, it works well. What is proper documentation? Documentations that contains the following attributes. It must be adequate. It must be efficient and enough, just not an invoice without management approval. It must be accurate, consistent, and real representation of facts, not conflicting and questionable. Must be easily available and accessible and retrievable in real time. So documentations need to be properly filed and organized. Delays may indicate non-compliance issues. It must be complete to that point in time, from the start to the end of the event. It must be credible, backed up on real and reliable facts, no creations. It must be corroborated, backed up by evidence such as invoices, receipts, timesheets, board reports, because an audit is not a conversation, it is a paper trail. It should not contradict any of the source document. You cannot charge one day to a grant for a meeting, but your timesheet states that you was on leave that same day. That is a contradiction. Okay? Are there any questions? Okay? There are two important phrases I would like you to remember. The only thing worse than too much documentation is wrong documentation. And what is not documented is not done. So keep those receipts out of those purses, off those shelves, and make sure you submit them to your financial office so you can have the proper documentation. Because it's part of our responsibility on the 2FR 200 508, which are our audit requirements. We are to provide our auditors with access to personnel, accounts, books, records, and supporting documentation. Therefore, it is critical that we retain, submit, and file documentation that substantiates our events. Please make sure it's proper, because one of the most common audit findings is the lack of reliable, accurate, and adequate documentation. So we must get it right. Remember, it is no longer we will file the document tomorrow. We must file it today. Are there any questions? Now we will do two exercises that focus on documentation. Exercise 1. An employee went to a regional training in San Diego. Part of her travel costs included airfare. What documentation will you require to substantiate this cost? To be proper documentation, the employer must provide proof that a meeting took place, proof of an event. It must be sufficient, an audit trail from booking the meeting to returning back to the office. So I will request, or our policy request, proof that the meeting was authorized by a supervisor. This can be an email from management, or it can be a signature on a travel reimbursement form. Proof of a meeting, such as an agenda, an email. We have to make sure that there was a meeting taking place, that she didn't go to San Diego to visit her BFF, right? Proof of attendance, maybe a certificate from the meeting or handouts from the meeting. Proof of travel, an airline ticket with the boarding pass, which shows that the employee actually boarded the plane. Okay, train tickets or a taxi ticket. Proof of a hotel, which substantiates stay. And finally, what we do, our final step, is to always make sure that the employee's timesheet reflects this travel, because the employee cannot be in San Diego on the 7th and 8th, but her timesheet states that she's on vacation the 7th and 8th. Okay, so are there any questions about this exercise?
I have a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
I'm wondering if your agency or other agencies are also trying to make sure their employees seek tax exemption when making purchases because of federal funding, and how you might go about this, or what you found helpful if you do that?
Yes, we do. The thing with tax, state tax exemptions is that you have to get an exemption form from each state. So we get the exemption like for DC, but in order to get that exemption from another state, we will have to apply to that state for that exemption. So you can go online and fill out the paperwork to get that tax exemption, but you will have to do it for each state. At least that's our finding. Does anyone else out there? Do you have other information that can help? Was it Autumn? Who asked the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was me, Autumn. I was
Yes.
just wondering, once you have that letter, we have a tax exempt letter, when you find that people um, aren't working with you in your tax exempt status, how do you manage that?
I guess we haven't come across that incident. Can someone help answer that question? Because I'm not really sure. When we submit our tax exempt certificate, we usually get that exemption. If no one has the answer, I can see if I can find out an answer for you, Autumn, and send that to you. Or at the end, if you would just send me that question on my email, and I'll get that answer for you.
I'm not sure, Jennifer, if it still works like this, but there had, in my experience, there were organizations or hotels where we could not get the tax exemption for federal stays, particularly in Washington, D.C. It was very hard to get state rates or federal rates and also tax exemptions. Sometimes you could, sometimes you couldn't, but we did find that those funds were reimbursed. So the effort was made to get the exemption, but if we could not get the exemption, we were not penalized for including the taxes on a refund, on a
On a refund.
uh-huh, from
Great.
from a grant.
Great. Thanks, Omi. So Omi was saying
Okay.
basically that the federal agency still reimbursed us for the taxes that we had to pay out.
Right.
Does anyone else have information? Okay, so I have a question in the chat. Let me see if I can figure out who that's from. I think this is from you, Autumn. You had another question in there about time cards. Would you like to ask your question live, or would you like for me to read it?
Sorry, I don't think I had a question about time cards. I was just sort of sharing how we manage time cards to break down our tasks by
Oh,
grant task breakdowns. So we're really intentional about it. I was just sharing that's what our agency does.
okay, great. Thank you. Okay, are there other comments? Okay, if not, we'll move to our second exercise. The executive director charged 5 hours to a timesheet listing tasks as financial oversight with the board treasurer, and the auditors requested proof of the meeting. What documentation will you provide? Okay, to be proper, employees must provide proof that a meeting took place, proof of an event, and it must be sufficient. So I will request a calendar event to prove the meeting was scheduled, which will prove the beginning of the meeting. An agenda signed by the board treasurer, not just a plain agenda, because those can be created and it's not substantiated. I will provide meeting notes signed by the treasurer, a follow-up emails discussing the meetings and final points. And I want to note here that it was the executive director who had the meeting with the board treasurer as a financial oversight meeting. So this type of meeting would be recorded like a board meeting, okay? But it's just like a financial oversight meeting. So notes and emails and conversations need to be recorded because the auditors will ask for that information in the audit. Are there any questions about this exercise? Okay, our next component is audit. The uniform guidance 2 CFR 200-500 set forth standards for the audit of federal awards. And to get started, I have 3 questions, and this is an open book exam. The guidance states that non-federal agencies are required to have a single audit if they spend how much money in a fiscal year? Correct. $750,000 or more. If you can go back one slide for me, Sahida. Back. I'm sorry. Thank you. 750,000 or more of expended federal funds. And here I want to note that it's expended federal funds, not money received, but money spent. Okay? Second question, what part of an entity operations does a single audit cover? As noted in our open book exam, it covers the entire operation of the entity. This includes the financial statements and the federal awards. And what funds are included in this $750,000? The money you receive directly from your federal agency and pass-through money that originated from a federal agency. So if you was a grant recipient for Organization B, and the funds that Organization B are paying you from are DOJ funds, those funds will be considered as part of your $750,000 federal funds because they originated from a federal agency. Okay, a single audit provides assurance that our entity have adequate internal controls and that we are generally in compliance with program requirements. This audit was previously called the 133 audit, and there is an exception to the single audit called the Program Specific audit. A Program Specific audit audits only one program, and the exception applies only if the organization expends $750,000 of money under this one federal program. It is very important to note that the cost of an audit is allowable only if you meet the audit requirements of $750,000. If you do not meet this requirement, you cannot charge the cost of an audit to your award. There are other audits if you fall below the $750,000 threshold. They are less expensive, but these costs still cannot be charged to your federal award. They are the financial statement audit, they have the attestation engagement audit, and a financial statement review. So what are our responsibilities when it comes to an audit? Well, based on the uniform guidance, we have many responsibilities. And they do not start the day of the audit, but they start the day we receive the award. Per section 303, We must maintain internal controls, comply with federal guidelines that governs our grants, which is 2 CFR and the special conditions, evaluate and monitor compliance, take prompt actions when we notice non-compliance, safeguard and protect personal identification information, so lock up those personnel files, and follow the procurement standards in 317 through 326. 508 states that we must arrange for the audit, set up the space that they will have the audit in. We must prepare the financial statements and expenditures of federal award statement. We must promptly follow up with questions and providing documentations, and we must provide documentation or access to the documentation. Are there any questions about our responsibilities?
I was just wondering what people are doing to prepare new hires for understanding when we rely on our staff so much who do direct service or who are doing the tasks to document things. I'm curious how people are explaining this and engaging in making sense of all of this to the people doing the work. I feel like a lot of leaders and directors, we get it. We get why the numbers matter and because we understand the match to funds. But I'm wondering how some are engaging folks in that dialogue when they start.
Okay, can someone provide information on how you are engaging your staff in handling these grant management requirements?
This is Umi again, and I think it's very important that as you have new hires, but even more important, not even just about new hires, about current staff, once you receive a grant application, that grant, a grant award, that it's necessary to take the grant award, call a meeting with the directors of programs, and to be able to ensure that they understand the responsibilities that each of them have in their departments, what needs to be documented, that they understand the requirements of the grant. You really need to go through the whole thing, the special conditions of the grant. It's very difficult to have an expectation in an organization that your staff members adhere to the federal guidelines if somehow that's a mystery to them. And a lot of times executive directors don't want to talk about money, about the budget. But in that case, what you'll have would be staff that come around and they'll say, we don't have any money to change her locks. We don't have any money to do this. Or so they would be left in the dark as to how they're going to carry out their responsibilities. So it's extremely important that the information within the grant is shared with the staff. And as you have new hires that come on board, that each position is looked at from their responsibility as it folds into one or more grants that person may be charged to. Not everybody is charged to just one grant. They may be charged to multiple grants. They spend 30% of their time with one grant and 70% of their time with another grant. They need to understand what their requirements are, and they should be reporting this information in their timesheets. They should be reporting this information in their staff reports, summaries that they're putting together, and that would hold the continuity of the information being approved by the funder. Federal funders are very, very specific on the way in which they will look at the management of that grant. And if you are doing what you said you were going to do in that grant proposal.
Thank you, Omi. That is so true, because when it comes to grant management, it's just not for the finance department. It's for everyone who is involved in that grant. And so everyone needs to know the special conditions, the deliverables that are required under that grant to provide efficient and effective grant management of that grant. And Omi discussed that and gave some really important points of that. So I hope that helped Autumn, because it is very important that everyone knows what is going on under each one of the grants they are involved in. Okay, so I'm going to kind of skip through these slides because I think I have maybe about 10 more minutes. Right, Sahita? I'm not sure, but okay, so the next section is the auditor responsibilities. I want to mention the auditor responsibilities because their responsibilities are quite simple. They audit our financial statements. The next slide, Sahita, and they audit our responsibilities. Their responsibilities are really simple. They audit the financial statements and they audit our responsibilities. So we must get it right. We must comply with our responsibilities because eventually we're going to be audited. So either it's going to be by an independent auditor or our funding agency audit, because our funding agency, they will provide us with audit advice, but they obtain and conduct quality control reviews on us also. Are there any other questions about auditing? Okay, if not, I'm going to go to our fourth component, which is board of directors. What is the purpose of a board of directors? It is to ensure that the organization is on track with regards to meeting its goals, to represent the public interest in the organization, to represent the organization as a legal voice. The reason is that organizations are not a natural person. They have rights and responsibilities, but they cannot read, they cannot write, think, or execute for themselves. Therefore, an organization needs a human to do this. And that human is the board of directors. Therefore, our board must be active. They must be the guiding, accountable voice for our organization, not the ED, not the CEO. A non-functioning board causes a lack of separation of duties between the organization and the ED, because these individuals become the voice of the organization. This should not happen. A non-functioning board, when it happens, there is no level of assurance to the public or to the funders that our mission, that we are operating within our mission. Therefore, at the very least, our board must accomplish some of the following tasks. It must provide oversight. Okay, it must approve our annual budget. It must provide oversight of the ED and the CEO. This is critical for an organization because just think about it. The board of directors is the CEO or the CEO supervisor. So if the board is not functioning, who oversees the decisions of the ED? Who signs her timesheets? Approve major changes in her benefits and salaries? Approve major financial decisions that the CEO or the CEO wants to make? Or as stated earlier, provide separation of duties. As in the instance of a timesheet, in the past, our auditors, whenever they found the timesheet without a signature, it was considered a finding because there was no approval to charge the time to the grant. If the board is non-functioning, who signs the CEO timesheet? So the CEO, so the oversight of a board is very important and very critical when it comes to the to the ED and the CEO of an organization. Okay, other duties the board must accomplish is review sign and submit the annual report, which is the Form 990 for most nonprofit organizations. Should meet once a year, and best practices is quarterly, 4 times a year. Should review and approve major borrowing. Keep records of its activities, including board minutes, financial oversight meetings, because the auditors will ask for these records. Remember, the board of directors have a fiduciary duty and responsibility in caring for the legal requirements and the finances of the operation. If you will go one more down for Ms. Eden. To the next slide, please. They provide assurance that all actions being performed are adhered to and related to the organization's mission, and they should always be involved in oversight functions. It is extremely important for the longevity of our organizations. Having an active board is getting it right. Are there any questions about the board of directors? If not, we'll move on to our final topic, which is internal capacity. Internal capacity provides our organization with the oxygen we need to thrive. It's somewhat like the mask on the airplane. Remember when we fly on the plane, the flight attendants instruct us to put on our mask first before helping others. Because if we run out of oxygen, we cannot help anyone else with their oxygen mask. Well, in order for our organization to thrive, we need that oxygen. We need to put on our masks first because we cannot help before we can help others. And putting on our masks first means investing in our internal capacity, developing and strengthening the skills, ability, processes, and resources that our organizations need to survive and to thrive. What does this look like? Investing in a proper financial management system, up-to-date technology to facilitate work, adequate office space, skilled employees, and enough employees, and other organization needs. This capacity is necessary. Next. This capacity is necessary and important because all organizations need levels of capacity to run strong and healthy organizations. Successful grant management and mitigating extra stress equals investing in internal capacity. And organizations with a strong internal capacity are more likely to succeed than those that do not have it. However, culture-specific organizations, we know this. We know these benefits, yet we still do not invest in our internal capacity. Why not? For various reasons. Our organizations respond to a hierarchy of needs, and our primary investment is in those that are much more urgent, such as shelter, food, childcare. Our funders have unrealistic expectations about how much it costs to run a nonprofit, therefore funding enough to cover program activities, but not operational activities. Or our organizations feel pressure to conform to funders' unrealistic expectations, accepting more responsibilities than internally we can handle or have the expertise to handle. Our funders expect us to do more with less, and we are hesitant to say no. If for one of these reasons or for others, in order for our organizations to thrive in this changing and challenging environment, to ensure solid grant compliance, to strengthen our impact and our performance, it is critical that we continue to invest in our internal capacity. Just as we pay attention to the health of our bodies, to live well, organizations requires care and feeding in order to operate effectively. Remember, Our ability to help others is limited if we run out of our oxygen first. Do I have any questions about internal capacity? Okay, the final slide. Next. Next. The final slide, go back one for me. The final slide includes 4 policies that all federal grant recipients must have according to the 2 CFR 200. Policies that your auditors and your agencies will ask you for if you're audited. They include advancement payment and reimbursement, allowable costs, conflict of interest, and this is the change. The difference here is that it's a conflict of interest with the employee, okay, and a procurement policy. And I list the sections of the CFR that you can go to help you create those policies. Well, I thank you for your patience and for joining me. Remember, getting it right means building a grant management structure that is solid, that is level, and that is stable. And if you succeed in all of these areas, your house will last through the storm, which is an audit. This is the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you once again.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much for those important nuggets. We will have Jennifer's presentation has been recorded. We're also collecting the information from the chat, so if there were specific questions, we can follow up with those as well. There are some materials and information that Jennifer has that we can also send out, links to some of the OMB pieces and other things that we can forward folks. There was good information in the chat, so we'll be making sure that we follow up there. We were scheduled to have a presentation or just talk quickly about a federal update, legislative update, but since it is 12:40 and we want to ensure that we are practicing self-care, we are going to break now for lunch, and we will come back. We'll do we are scheduled as of right now to have lunch from, 1 second. What time does lunch end, Zahida?
We scheduled an hour for lunch.
Okay, so if folks can plan to be back at 1:45, then we can pick up there with the federal legislative update. And then Umi and I will talk through federal grant opportunities from the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the Department of Justice and the Office of Victims of Crime. So if we can come back together at 1:45 using the same login information via Zoom, we will reconvene at that time. So 1:45 reconvene. Thanks, everyone. And thanks again, Jennifer.
Thank you, Carmen.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. I want you to hear my voice. Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks, everyone. Awesome, awesome, awesome job.